Alright, next question. This person asks, what do you look out for when you're practicing drills by yourself at home? At the dojo, your instructor can correct you and tell you if you're improving, and a sparring partner always offers fresh input. But when you're by yourself, you might be repeating the wrong movements for all you know. Alright, my feedback on that is that people should not undervalue the ability to learn, to basically teach yourself. You need to have confidence in yourself. You should not undervalue your ability to self-learn. There's essentially, Buddha would teach that all the truths are within you. And I see it that way. There's a lot of wisdom within you that just has to be discovered. You need to trust yourself and not always depend on the outside people to give you to point you towards truth. Nobody can give you truth. Nobody can ever give it to you. It's an experience that you have from within. And the people from the outside, all they can do is just kind of point you in the right direction. But still, the truth comes from within yourself. So you cannot underestimate and undervalue your ability to teach yourself. But yes, expert knowledge, it essentially is very useful. And for example, somebody that has been doing something for almost their whole lives, it's just so easy for them. Like somebody that has been working on cars for 20 years and you don't know anything about cars, and something's wrong with your car, they immediately know how to fix it. Whereas for you, it might take you, if you tried to fix it, it might take you 3 weeks. But then for this mechanic, it takes him 3 minutes. That's essentially what happens. A carpenter that knows how to fix homes. They've been doing something for so long that you tell them to, replace your sink. They do it in an hour. But if you try to do it yourself, it might take you 16 hours. Even if you go to Home Depot, you find these do-it-yourself books. They'll literally separate the time frames and say if you're a beginner, it's going to take 8 hours. If you're intermediate, it'll take you 4 hours. If you're a professional, it'll take you 1 hour. So the help from professionals, it can help your growth tremendously if it's the right professional. If they truly know what they're doing, they could literally help you advance in getting better at a certain skill. They could literally help you get to a high level in 2 years, whereas if you didn't have that person's help, it might take you 10 years. So the knowledge and expertise of professionals, certain professionals, not saying all professionals, clearly can be a huge benefit towards your growth. But in the same token, as I stated, there are people out there that could self-teach themselves, and they have like a certain special ability in doing that. Like they don't really need to depend on outsiders to teach them. Like they have the ability to teach themselves. Basically, it's like they're creators. It's like the creativity that they have within makes them become the professional themselves. Now, this may be a rare case, but this is definitely a truth that I see. Like it's just, some people, it's just in them. Like they just could just do it. They don't even need the help of other people. They just know how to do it because it's in them. And they could just learn something by watching. Like sometimes there's people, they're really good at visual learning. They just watch something and they can immediately do it. Other people, they need like a step-by-step guide, and they need things properly explained. and it takes time. So it's different for different people, but it's like some people are meant for certain things. Like, it just comes with ease for them. Like, they were born to do something. Like, it might be music. It's just in them. And that's why they could improve so quickly, next to somebody else, that it's not natural for them. So you have to find out what your natural strengths are, and those are the things where you're going to be able to improve very easily with minimal effort. So it's really dependent on the individual, and so basically, when you're at home, you're practicing the drills. If you're practicing a drill that was taught to you in your school, then it's based off of memory. You got to remember what the teacher told you that you needed to correct, and you got to constantly self-correct yourself at home based on memory. Or you might even write it down. He might say, every time you punch, don't drop your hand. Make sure your hand is up. Then you got to stand in front of the mirror and constantly remember the corrections that he indicated, and you got to work on those corrections. So it's based on memory. But if your teacher has made a video, then you just watch the video and make sure that you follow along the video the best that you can, based on the corrections or the instruction of that video. Or it depends on where you're learning from. Some people, they learn from videos and they just follow along with what they see. And then when you follow along with what you see, you need to follow it almost identically. And then you follow it identically, you need to just basically mirror the person's movements. And that's when it comes to the techniques. And a sparring partner, see, the more that I'm starting to realize, starting to see this more, is that a lot of the martial arts schools in general, and a lot of the, pretty much all the combat sport gyms, they're not training people for realistic combat in my eyes. They're just not. Because you're like constantly sparring against somebody that's highly trained, and they're trained in what you're trained in. But that's not the case for out there in the streets. Out there in the streets is completely spontaneous, unpredictable, and you don't know who you're fighting against. But then in the dojo or in the kun or the gym, you're constantly sparring against people that you know, or people that are trained just like you're trained. That's not realistic, because those are not the people you're fighting. It's like police officers shooting each other or fighting each other when they're not the enemies. The enemies are out there and they're called criminals. They have nothing to do with the police force. So that's what I see, that a lot of martial arts schools and so-called martial artists, that they have it wrong. They keep fighting amongst each other when these people are not the criminals. These are not the violent people. The violent people are out there. And you don't know who it is. You don't know what they know. You don't know how old they'll be. You don't know how fit they'll be or anything. You don't know if they have any weapons or anything. So we're not properly training for the reality when we constantly spar with people in these unrealistic ways. It's like a taekwondo school. Put one taekwondo student against another taekwondo student. That's absolutely unrealistic. Absolutely. Because if you get in a confrontation out there, you're not going to be sparring against a Taekwondo student, and if you did spar against a Taekwondo student, it's not going to be the same student that you're sparring with in the school. It's going to be somebody completely different. And let's say this again. Let's not call this Taekwondo. You know, you're sparring against somebody who's focused a lot on kicking. I mean, you don't know what's going to happen out there. You don't know the person wants to tackle you, if the person's going to grab a hold of you, try to choke you, the person tries to use some weapons, the person's going to kick at you or punch at you. You don't know if it's going to be a man or a woman. You don't know how old they're going to be. You don't know how strong they are. I mean, the sparring, essentially, in a lot of the martial arts schools is just not realistic combat in my eyes. It's just like a way of play fighting. It's just like real life chess. It's not reality. It's just a real life way of playing chess that can help you develop the tools that are necessary for survival in real life, but it will never be the actual experience of survival in real life. So it's not easy, you know, to train like in reality-based combat, but also people's reality are different. You know, a lot of it is just based on your environment, where you live, your choice of employment, and things of that nature. You know, you live in Chicago where there's guns everywhere. It's going to be a different reality than, say, you lived in Japan where guns are just banned from the country. You go to work every day as a police officer, it's going to be different than going to work every day as like a grocery clerk. It's going to be different. You go to the bars every weekend, it's going to be different than somebody who just stays inside every weekend. Like, your choices in life changes your reality, and because your reality changes, it's really hard to prepare for a school to help people prepare for what's essentially most practical for their own lives. If you're a bouncer, your reality is going to be different than somebody who's a bus driver. So essentially everybody has to kind of figure out the most practical training methods based on their lifestyle. And the sparring is just not, a lot of times is not the realistic way of what is for survival. It's just like a playful way for martial artists to kind of test their skills. That's just all it is. So essentially you go to your school and you receive like constant feedback from your instructor of what needs to be improved. You basically have to just keep that in your memory while you do your homework at home and just keep working on what needs to be improved until it is where it needs to be, and then you move on to the next thing. You know, so if your instructor's saying, hey, you know, you're not doing the spin kick correctly, you got to put your hand this way, you got to spin that way, it's got to look like this, you got to make it look exactly the way that it needs to look. And you could do that at home, constantly repeating the technique, the execution of the technique, and remembering his feedback and what needs to be fixed. And then once it's up to his satisfactory, then you can move on to the next technique and then repeat the process. Because if you have an instructor, then that's what he's there for, to help you improve your technique. But if you don't have an instructor and you're just learning off the internet, watching videos, the video becomes your instructor. Whoever's teaching the technique becomes your instructor for that day, and you follow along with the same principle. You got to do it exactly the way that he's doing it. And it's got to look exactly the way that he's basically performing the technique. And you have to be honest with yourself and whether or not you are properly executing the technique, because when it's video, the instructor's not there to tell you that you're doing it wrong. You got to basically tell yourself that you're doing it wrong. You might have to videotape yourself. You might have to use a mirror to see if you're actually doing it exactly the way that you're supposed to be doing it. If you're not, then you need to admit that to yourself and then constantly work on it. So then you end up becoming your own instructor in a way, by putting yourself in check. And that's the thing with the video. The person in the video is not going to give you the feedback because he can't see you. He's only demonstrating. But a live instructor, even if it's through Skype or online or in person, he can look at what you're doing and give you the feedback immediately and say, you're not doing this part right, you need to do it this way. So that's essentially how it goes. And if you don't watch videos to learn, you don't read books, and you don't learn from somebody directly, and you try to just do it yourself, it's still probably going to be based off of memory, because you might be remembering back of what martial art movies you watched, and you try to mimic and do what they did in the movies. But you may be doing a bunch of techniques that are not effective, and then you will not discover that it's ineffective until you actually spar with people, and then they'll exploit the problems with those techniques. So that's where the sparring comes very handy, is when they basically teach you why this technique that you're practicing is unuseful for a fighting situation, because you're basically putting yourself in greater danger by exposing certain vital areas of your body and things of that nature. So that's what it boils down to when it comes to actual technique training. So that's my feedback on that one.